good to see everybody again. I know it's been a little while, and I met a few people on various picket lines and activities that said that they hadn't seen one of these little video updates, which I guess are now being called fireside chats, which is sort of hysterical. But at any rate, happy to update again. I think, let me start with what's been going on organizationally a little bit. I know that inside the organization we're always sort of abuzz with activity with everything going on in the units and then the general planning, but it's not a lot of opportunity except through the mass nurse and through other forms of communication to hear that work that's being done. So by way of example, we usually have our convention, as you all know, would be coming up in October, and we originally were going to have it at the Seaport, which we had to cancel, obvious to everybody as a result of the pandemic. We were not able to have a convention of that magnitude. But then we thought maybe we could do it outside, and we had looked at some open tent options over at the Irish Cultural Center that was going to be for early October. But the most recent updates from the state that happened, I think, last week that reduced the size of any kind of meeting down from even 100 to 50 people at a time. That's inclusive of staff and our members. There's obviously no way we could hold any kind of meaningful business meeting or otherwise with those limitations. So the Irish Cultural Center is off as well. So at this point, we don't have a date for our regular annual meeting, and we can't put one in place until we find a way through the state regulations to be able to allow the setup that we have, which is a one member, one vote system, and anybody can come. As long as you're a member, there's no fee or anything. You can come into the business meeting and you're free to fully participate and vote in that process. A little unique, it's great, except obviously during a pandemic, it's not all that easy to do. So we'll continue to work on it, and when the state releases a little bit more on what we're allowed to do, we'll replan for a convention and we'll put the word out to the membership. Until that time, the other thing that's happening that I hope a lot of people are aware of is we have an MNA election that's in process now. So hopefully you received your ballot in the mail. It's a mail ballot system for the state organization, and they need to be received by the election company, which is being run by an outside vendor. I think they have to be in their hands by September 4th. So if you haven't filled it out, by all means actually participate in the election. It's great. We have a very active campaigning this year with a number of people running, which is always great to hear. And I just want to thank the folks that are stepping up and running for the various positions. It's kind of wonderful to see. I know it's difficult in contentious elections when you have people running against each other, but on the other hand, from my perspective, to have people actively engaged, wanting to run and see the value and leadership of the organization speaks volumes to the members at large and the work that's being done here. So I thank everybody for their participation in that, and don't forget to fill out those ballots and get them in. Donna Kelly-Williams, the president of the MNA, will be retiring and stepping down, and she's been president now, I think it's going to be going on 11 years. So this will be a long run through a lot of changes in the healthcare system and a lot of battles on the front lines, many, many wins. So she's been a fantastic leader, and it's going to be really very big sea change for the organization to see her step down. But I wish her the very best. It's been a pleasure to work with her, and she deserves, I know she has some wonderful children and great-grandchildren and a lot to enjoy herself with, and I'm sure we'll see her active in the organization continue. But unfortunately, without the convention, we don't have a normal process of being able to celebrate that with her. So we're also looking at that, and but I just wanted to remind people that she'll be finishing up her term, and it's kind of a good opportunity to reflect and to thank people like Donna who have put so much time and energy to running and working with the organization through all the successes and battles that we've had and the ones yet to come. The nursing division, as I had said previously, really transitioned very quickly to an online format, and they got an outside company through Australia as a porthole to use. So we are transitioning everything, and that includes now the labor programs and labor development. So there'll be a series of labor school programs that will be going online as well. So look for those. With that too, I know a lot of the folks have been using Zoom. Everybody's got Zoom now, Zoom, Google, and everything else that's out there. But the Zoom seems to be the one that most people are most comfortable with. So that's fine. We're doing Zoom meetings in the bargaining units, and the bargaining unit memberships are doing Zoom membership meetings as well. Some of the larger units, a bit more difficult, you'll have to break that up, or we'll look at other formats if you want to. But to continue to have that, even though it's electronic face-to-face meeting time, is really vitally important right now. As far as negotiations and meetings, though, we can still have in-person. We are now back, and the office is back. We have everything set up that we need to do. We put plexiglass on all the cubicles, and we've done all the things that we need to do. And we have space inside the building for people to have meetings. You're limited to 25 people, that includes staff, at the meeting. And we just need to know in advance, and we'll set everything up. We have some folks that, we can get food deliveries and stuff. So I would encourage you, if you're still doing meetings or had previously done meetings at the MNAs or the district offices, to not rule that out. You can do that. And I know more and more of our negotiations, people are going to do, the nurses will meet, or the health professionals and nurses will meet at an office together so that they can caucus together, and then they'll Zoom in the management team for negotiations. That allows you much more time to have the type of dialogue and free flow of communication that's so important when you're doing negotiations or taking on any issue, even if it's not negotiations, if it's a labor management or if it's some other issue that's happening, which there are so many happening right now. That gives you the best opportunity to talk to your colleagues and figure out how you want to address it. Try to make it as close as we can to the way we do the work and the way we do it best, and then to use all of the electronic capacity that we have available to step it up to the extent that we are able to as well. So, and if you have any ideas or things that haven't happened that you need to have addressed, just let me know, directly email me or call me, or the AD that you have or the staff. Just get the information into the organization, because if you've got an idea or you've got an issue that you think that we haven't really come up a solution with yet, just let us know. We'll work on it. That's what we're here for. I mean, you all know this backwards and forwards. I mean, there's a lot of the general population out there talking about the vaccine, the vaccine. The vaccine, I certainly hope that one becomes available that's thoroughly tested and secure to take. But regardless of when that happens, it's not going to happen immediately, and it certainly isn't going to, even if we did have something magically available in the next few weeks, the amount of time to get it ramped up to a meaningful percentage of the population to diminish what we're doing now is not in the cards either. So this is a marathon, it is not a sprint, and we are going to have to continue to do what we're doing with vigilance, no matter how frustrating it is to folks. So the mask, the public en masse, I don't know if we have to come up with a different strategy, but it seems to me that a lot of the public is in a bit of a disbelief that COVID is really a deadly disease. And maybe your world that you're seeing inside the hospital hasn't gotten out to enough people, and nor do we want it to, frankly, but to make them understand that it's very, very real. And while so many people will get it and get through it fine, and that's great, the folks that won't, that's somebody's mother, brother, family member, and if we can avoid that from happening, we should do everything to do so. So we still have to be vigilant. I think you guys are great communicators. I think the more that you can talk to your family and friends and post on social media that you see it up front what happens for the few that can't get through this, even with the new treatments that we have, and that you wouldn't wish that on anybody. And so it's not a really hard thing to put on a mask. So if you want to do nothing else but save somebody's life, just put on the mask for as long as it takes until we get through it. As we look to the second wave, which everybody is saying, probably is going to happen in the fall, and fall is sort of a big word. I mean, I would like to assume, unfortunately, that we're probably looking at September with the schools coming back, which I'll touch upon in a minute. It just inevitably, you start to mingle more people that coupled with the season change and the exposure to influenza, which only confuses the matter when the symptoms look very similar. That we can expect that really to be on us probably by mid to late September. And if that's the case, we wanted to talk to Secretary Sutters about the guidance that was in place previously. That was the first wave, and that was a learning curve and done rapidly. Now, what have we learned and what would we do differently? So we are talking to them about, okay, You didn't have enough masks the first time because everybody was caught short-handed, even though there were books out and experience out saying that this is exactly what could happen. But be that as it may, that may be shame on us once, but not shame on us twice. What's our plan? So I know we're looking at domestic manufacturers. There are a couple. There's one in Rhode Island. And if you haven't seen already, 3M, which did the bulk of the N95 masks, but unfortunately the federal government was picking them up. They have a new mask design, but it's a tri-fold mask. Comes in different sizes, and the small size is actually good, very good for those folks with smaller faces that weren't getting a good seal from the other designs. The state will then order, and they'll come up with the system in order to get the other big problem with ordering the masks is you want to make sure that you get them. They're not for force majeure taken by the federal government, so that's why domestic manufacturing is so important in getting a supply line directly to us. But they will be the group to step up when somebody doesn't have enough. It's still going to be incumbent on the institutions to order up enough supply. So herein lies our real question and what we're fighting for. And I would like you all to be as verbal as you can on the front lines on this. The first time around, everybody kept saying we're meeting the guidelines. Well, that's because the guidelines by CDC were lowered. Anybody could have met the guidelines. If as long as you had a handkerchief, I guess you were meeting a guideline. So 6 feet is the desired amount of distance for the idea of larger particles, but it is still aerosolized. And so erring on the side of caution is really the better approach. And that's exactly what we had said at the beginning. If you don't know, then treat it as if it could be, because that's the safer alternative. Unfortunately, if you don't have the supplies, it becomes impossible to put that standard in place. That should not be the case this time around. We're going to continue to push that. We're asking for state legislation specifically on that for both transparency in all PPE, so you can go and look up and see exactly what they have, and that the standards that be put in place be consistent with scientific standards, not like, okay, we don't have any today, so we'll lower the standard and now you're in compliance. So keep pushing, it's working. But we can't let up, because if you do, they'll lower the standard, because you're not only in competition now with all the hospitals in the world that will be facing this at the same time again, but we also have everybody else opening up. So in the schools, which I'm going to talk about now, they also need PPE as well. So you can imagine the manufacturing needs are enormous, and everybody's vying for the highest standards. So we need to get our stockpiles in place. Like to see 90 days stockpile in place, but at a minimum they should have 30 days with the capacity to be able to get the additional supplies as they need it, known additional supplies. I think, the education system, just like we were saying as nurses, if you don't know, you err on the side of caution, because that's the safest thing to do. That same premise is true for the schools. On the one hand, we all know, students do better in inline classrooms. There's no question for my son, I'm not a great teacher. It's just not my expertise. I'm sure he's not going to be as well educated at home as he would within the school system. But I certainly understand the teacher's position that if the system isn't safe, if we don't have the equipment that we need, if we can't keep the students safely apart, if we don't have the ventilation system inspected and known what we need to have it properly in place in order to make sure everybody's safe, then you don't open it and say, well, let's see how that works out. That's foolish. And I agree. But that brings us to what can we do besides PPE, which we have to be aggressive in making sure we have enough of. Also, just the hand washing, the masks outside, all of that stuff. The other aspect of this that we all have to really push for is the testing. It's been all over the map, and I know the state's trying to do this best they can, but probably the only best news that I've heard in the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure you guys are all reading everything you can as well, is there appears to be in the works, finally, a saliva test that would be between, as I've read it so far, 94 to 95% plus accuracy, which is what you need. Some of this other testing wasn't all that accurate because it was done so rapidly. If you can get those, then they could be tested and their turnaround time would be a matter of hours. That is a game changer, because if we can get saliva tests and we know the results quickly, we can make contact tracing done appropriately. We can quarantine both students and families if we need to, and we can really, in a much more surgical way, go after the pandemic versus what we're doing now. So if there has to be a little glimmer of hope here, because you can't imagine the vaccine's going to come real quick, but what you really could be hoping for and pushing that we get to see as much of everywhere and readily available to all of us, so that the school nurses in the school system and that we as nurses in any of the healthcare environments have access to it. If there's a saliva test that can give us rapid turnaround time, that would be a game changer. So let's all hope for that. I guess test is kind of the name of the game there. The kids that were graduating from nursing school in their last year, I mean, when this, when we all got thrown into the pandemic and everything shut down, they had no way to take their exams, so they couldn't sit for their NCLEX, but they were graduating. So they were in this purgatory. On the other hand, we had a dramatic need for people to be helping clinically. So if you weren't aware, and you probably are, the state passed an order allowing those folks to go ahead and get licensure. So they became RNs without their NCLEX because there was no NCLEX to sit for because it had been shut down. That is good through December 31st. Those nurses who are RNs, but they're sort of temporarily licensed right now, for lack of a better way to put it, they have to pass their NCLEX by December 31st, otherwise they're not going to be RNs anymore. That's as long as the emergency's in play. We're watchful of this because there's a question on whether or not the state is going to want to extend that. I think that the facilities in the hospitals would very much like to extend it, but I think if there's not a need to extend it, that's a dicey situation to have folks that are licensed but not having passed their exams. We're hearing a lot of confusion among the nurses in the field. Are they delegating supervision to them under the nurse's license that's supervising and delegating, or are these standalone licenses? Who's liable? How does that work? It's a really kind of gray area, and as with most things, if you can avoid a gray area, you do. So if we've had enough preparation time now, and NCLEX exams can be sat for, then really this should not occur past December 31st, so that there's clarity for the new grads coming out as well as for the nurses who are going to be working with them. I'm mindful that every experience is different in different institutions, so we'd love to hear feedback from you if there are things that we're not understanding or that you think that we should address in that regard. And also in any of the other guidance, I know visitation's been somewhat of a nightmare. As much as I understand families' desire to see folks, one of the fears that we have is coming true in some areas, and that is that the nurses are being asked to be the enforcers, and it's just not appropriate, right? If they're going to do visitation, there should be a single entrance. They should be signing into a logbook. I don't understand why. If they're not signing into a logbook, I don't understand how we're supposed to trace them if it turns out that they ended up being positive or a patient was positive. That makes no sense. So they have to go, they should be vetted going through one single place, temp check, logbook, made sure that they hadn't traveled anywhere, et cetera, all the normal questions. And they should be one at a time. And you shouldn't have to police it because there should be assigned in the institution somebody to be doing that work. So we're aware of it. If you're running into a problem, please let your AD know. I'm trying to get those situations back to Secretary Sutter so that she can get on the hospitals to address them. I would say by and large, you guys probably are feeling it, but you're probably almost back to 100%, in some places over 100% in terms of your elective surgeries as they try to catch up with what they did. The state says that if indeed we go through a second wave and they run into problems, that they are positioned again to tell the hospitals to close down elective cases. Now, as much as they've said that, and I appreciate that, I think that there'll be an extreme level of reluctance to do so. So if that's the case, we had the great benefit, I'm sure that the OR nurses and some of the other folks are probably loath to have to go through this again, but you all being redeployed and helping out in the ICUs with doning and doffing and proning and everything else that had to be done, and runners and everything else, was an enormous help. But if we don't close down the surgeries during a second wave and we do run into an increase, then the question that's going to be on everybody's mind is, what's the plan for all the additional help that we were able to receive by those folks that were redeployed that won't be redeployed this time. You should be having that discussion now. So if you're in labor management, I would be asking those questions now. What is the plan for a proning team? What is the plan for doning doffing? What is the plan for runners? And if you have to step up and they go into surge, you know the plan for the surge, you can ask for it, they have to give it. That's fine, but where is all the other adjunct help that was in place that may not be in place this time because the ORs will be running and the other units will be running? So ask those questions now in advance of getting into the surge. I think we'll be better off for it. Beyond that, guys, always good to see you out in the field. I hope that we're going to be doing more stuff. And if there's any questions or thoughts or whatever, please get them into me. And if there's anything that we haven't seen that you think you just assume that we see, don't assume. Just say it. If it turns out that it is something that's happening elsewhere that we can get you information, that's great. But we rely upon you guys speaking up on what's happening in the field, so make sure that you communicate with us. And then just, I know it sounds redundant, but just enormous thank you. As time goes on and it gets kind of like, yeah, COVID, sick of talking about it, and I'm going to read about the elections every day because COVID's turned into a political thing now more than anything else. But, you guys go to work every day and you just try to do the work and take care of patients, and you know it's coming, and that's a tremendous amount of stress on you to try to figure it all out. Not only to figure it all out again with your families and how to do that safely at home, but to figure it out also with the kids going back to school and to make that all work. And it's a lot of stress, never mind the stress that's there taking care of patients. And you do it with such a level of professionalism and passion that to leave this without saying again a tremendous amount of thank you from me, I just would be remiss. So I see it, we all see it, and we all thank you for it. So until next time, be well and be safe.